Following nationwide protests, many corporate executives have committed, at least vocally, for racial equality. But contributing to systemic change requires more than a press release. CNBC contributor Joanne Lipman writing today that as CEOs implement action plans to disrupt systemic racism in the United States, they can reflect on the MeToo movement for some ideas on what works in affecting change and what doesn't. Let's bring in Joanne Lipman. She is Distinguished Fellow for Journalism at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. She's also a CNBC contributor. And Joanne, I know that for several years now, you've been traveling and talking to male executives, talking to them about the MeToo movement. And what you've seen happen there shows you a lot of parallels to the corporate response we're seeing right now to the Black Lives Matter movement. What are you kind of seeing there, and how do you think this kind of plays out from here?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. So there are a lot of parallels between what's going on now and the Me Too movement, and also a lot of lessons that we need to learn, because a lot of what happened, we're seeing the same playbook. We're seeing lots of corporate statements of support and maybe some donations. We're also seeing some CEOs who are starting to lose their positions, like CrossFit yesterday. I'm sure we're going to see more of that to come. And we're seeing the rise of this white allies movement. And I think this is really relevant because it's sort of an outgrowth of what we saw in the Me Too movement, where suddenly we had male allies. Male allies were people who said, oh, feminism, we never thought that was our cause, but now we want to help. White allies, we're seeing exactly the same thing. The issue is, if we look at what actually happened with the Me Too movement and what corporate changes happened, we really have not had a lot of movement. I mean, in terms of representation of women, in terms of promotions, in terms of pay, we're just not seeing the movement. And so if we want to avoid those same missteps now, we've really got to put words into action. And that is what's been missing from the Me Too movement, something for all of us to learn.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a few steps there's some steps that, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there's steps that companies can take that have been effective and that we need to see more of. And by the way, what you just mentioned with Amazon, what you were talking about earlier, is really relevant here, right? We have known for years that the artificial intelligence software, facial recognition software, does not recognize Black faces accurately. And it's only now that Amazon is doing something about it. If you look at representation in terms of companies, the tech firms, for example, have terrible representation of people of color, less than 4%, versus a Black population that's like 13%. So, but there are things that you can do. One of the first things and the easiest that, you really got to trust your data and look at your data. And that means quantifying, first of all, promotion rates. Look at your promotion gap. So companies have gotten so much better than they used to be in terms of hiring at the entry level diverse candidates. But then if you look at every level going up, it becomes less and less diverse, more white, more male. And if companies are really serious about this, you got to look at where is the leakage, because it's not the problem of the employees. It's not that your employees aren't cutting it. It's that you've got some sort of structural bias built into your organization, and you can pinpoint it there. And similarly, we've seen the same thing with wage gap analyses, which can be very helpful.
Joanne, I saw a strain on Twitter, a thread that had kind of run through just about, let's say, in journalism. Part of the reason that you don't see more diversity in journalism is because for a very long time, all of these newsrooms relied on unpaid internships, and that just cuts off a lot of people who have access to this. That seems to me like a pretty significant thing that should be considered.
And Becky, you're right. And not only that, it actually starts even before the internship. It starts in college. A lot of college newspapers is considered an extracurricular activity. Those students are blocked out. Students on financial aid, who disproportionately minority students, cannot work on their student newspapers if the student newspapers don't provide a stipend, because they have to have a job to go with their student aid. So more colleges we see are now starting to pay. Then you go into the internship phase. If you're not unpaid internships. And by the way, also, the fact that in journalism in particular, those entry-level jobs are very poorly paid. So that's another issue to deal with. But there's another issue that I think is really important, which is who's doing the interviewing, who's making the decisions, who are the decision makers about who's hiring, and also who's getting promoted, like who is making those decisions. There's in football, Becky, I know you know this, there's the Rooney Rule that if you're hiring a coach, you've got to include a diverse slate of candidates. Every company should have a Rooney Rule for their candidates, but they also need a similar Rooney Rule for their interviewers. Because if you've got if your interviewers, your people who make the decisions are largely white men, and you've got a diverse slate of candidates, you're not going to get the optimal result. And so you want to have that ability to understand, to have people who are making those decisions who have diverse points of view.